Hi, everybody. Welcome. Andrew, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I'm glad to be talking about this.
So everyone in the room watching the replay, thank you so much for coming. And I'm really excited to talk about technical communication, technical writing. This is supposed to be the first in a series of talks about how you might use English skills or good writing skills to get a career, to develop a satisfying, rewarding career. We're going to hear from a series of people through this academic year, and I'm just really grateful to Andrew for being our first speaker. Thank you for coming, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks again. I was really excited to get your invitation. I like talking about TechCom. As I was telling Daniel before we started recording, I had a lot of material at my previous job. I was constantly trying to convince them to hire more tech writers and explain why we needed them. So I have a lot of material that was going to no use. So I'm glad that we'll be talking about it today.
This is great. Okay, so I'm going to get started unless anyone's got any questions. So to introduce Andrew, Andrew Dillon earned his BA in English and MFA in creative writing from the University of Tennessee. Great university, I've heard a lot about it. He has worked as a technical writer since 2013. Previously at Emerson and Cigna, he starts a new position at Adyen. Did I say that right?
Adyen, yeah.
Adyen in the end of this year. He's also a poet, and his debut collection will be released online later this month. Follow him at andrewdillonpoetry.com or connect on LinkedIn. And you're moving, if you don't mind me sharing this with the group. So Adyen is a Dutch company, is that right?
That's right. Yeah, they're headquartered in Amsterdam. They have offices all over, including like San Francisco, Chicago, New York. But I am moving to Amsterdam for this tech writing gig.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to start my questions. And again, this is meant to be interactive. Hi, Maria. If you'd like, please jump in with questions. But I've got some prepared ones, but you know, the floor is open. So first, Andrew, can you tell us how you went from studying an MFA in poetry at the University of Tennessee to a tech writing career?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to look off to the side because I prepared answers just so that I wouldn't just go on long-winded. So I knew before grad school that teaching was not going to be the profession for me. I had taught high school English in Seoul right after my bachelor's. And then I worked as a substitute for a little while after I got back from Korea. A year before I started my MFA, it was actually still an MA at the time. Someone told me I should look into, I was talking about teaching and how I wasn't sure it was right for me. And I can't remember who, suggested I think about technical writing as a career. So I reached out to Dr. Russell Hurst. He's since retired, but I think that was only a year or two ago. So he was in the department recently. And he gave me an overview. This was summer 2011, so a year before I started grad school. And he just gave me an overview, like, here's some things you need to know, some skills you might want, who to talk to. So when I started my MFA, I had 6 hours of electives, so 2 classes, and I took a tech editing class. It was actually a 400 level class, so I was with, mostly senior undergrads. And then I did a practicum at Y12 with Dr. Hurst, Y12 National Security Complex. And at the same time, I joined the Society for Technical Communication. There's a chapter in Knoxville, the East Tennessee chapter, and did some volunteer work for them. So by the summer of 2013, another STC member had encouraged me to apply for a tech writer role at Emerson. They are off Dutchtown Road. They have an office there. And then that woman, Amy Kidd, became my mentor and colleague, and I worked that job for about 3 years.
That's great. Okay, that makes sense. So reaching out to Russell Hurst seems like a really critical stage.
Yeah.
And then going from there. That's great. Okay, next question. So many of us may have this question in our minds. I do, and even though I've taught technical writing at UT now for several years, what is technical writing? What is technical or tech writing or technical communication? What is it? What does it mean? What kind of things does it include?
Sure. So there are a lot of directions to go with this answer, but I think the most succinct way to say this is tech writing, or maybe technical communication in general, is simplifying complexity. And a tech writer would achieve that by producing knowledge resources that help one or more audiences understand what something is or how to do something. Tech writers are focused on the needs of the end user, the needs and the context of the end user. So this is where like your rhetorical skills come in very useful. The user could be internal or external. It could, someone within your company, or it could be, people like us who are just using something on the web. A colleague who needs to understand how to get access to a new tool, or a customer who has purchased a product. So to a large degree, tech writers are taking the abstract and making it concrete, which is why people with an English degree are very well suited to careers in tech comm. Personally, I think it's really similar to the mindset you have when you're writing, like poetry specifically. You're taking a lot of abstract concepts like, love or loss or grief or whatever, and then you've got to find concrete ways to make that stick for a reader. In the same way, when you're writing documentation, you're taking a lot of like a data dump of information in some cases, but you've got to write very precise language targeted at specific users for how they get things done, what they do and what they don't need to know, because you don't want to overload your documentation with content that is just going to look very overwhelming. I don't know. There's a lot more. I'll stop there. There's a lot more to say about what tech writing is.
No, that's great. Maybe you can come back to that later, but that's really interesting. And then, so I guess I do have a follow-up question to that, which is like, so the idea is tech writers simplify complexity, make concrete the abstract, create knowledge resources, often within a company or an organization. What kind of actual jobs do tech writers get? Where do tech writers work? What are some places you could do tech writing if you got into that field?
So tech writers, they could be anywhere really. And I'm not trying to, that's not a great answer, but really there's the potential for tech writers to work in any industry. Your job title is going to vary a lot. Depending on the industry, depending on the company you work for. I worked at Cigna most recently, the insurer, and they actually didn't have technical writers in their career architecture. So my title was business analyst, but because that's just what my colleagues did.
So interesting.
But I was writing documentation and doing some other kind of tech comm related work around that. Big industries are like tech, financial tech, IT, healthcare, engineering, manufacturing. Those are if you were job searching, if you were on LinkedIn or Indeed, you would see a lot of roles open in those industries. And then the job titles would be tech writer, technical editor, content strategist, documentation specialist, science writer is very similar. Science writing is very similar to tech writing. Instructional designer. There's a lot of, it depends a lot on the industry, but there's a lot of different titles and roles you could have.
That's so interesting. And while I obviously don't want to downplay the skills you need to do this job or the differences of what different companies and fields would expect, I do think it's worth people in the audience sort of paying attention that as a lot of us might see a job that says tech writer, we think, well, I'm a writer, I could apply for that. But you might not apply for business analyst, or you might not apply for, designer of, information designer, but they're sort of, I don't want to say the same job, but they are sort of iterations of the same job that we do actually have a lot of the skills or the aptitudes for. Is that fair?
I think so, yeah. And that makes it, it does make it difficult sometimes to find all the available like job openings, because you've really got to comb through the job description and like kind of know what you're looking for to say like, oh, this is a documentation role at its core. But they're not calling it documentation and they're not calling it tech writing, but that's essentially, I mean, a business analyst, broadly speaking, they're gathering requirements and creating business documents. That's easily something a tech writer might do, but you probably wouldn't think of that. And there's probably also some ancillary skills like maybe SQL, like for data analysis. A lot of that stuff you can learn on the job. It depends on the hiring manager. They might say, just take a SQL course so it's on your resume. Or they might say, no, you need 5 years of that skill. You can kind of, if you're willing to spend, it can be a lot of time, but if you're willing to spend the time like looking at those job announcements, you can kind of see where the trend in tech comm is going. For example, like docs as code was a trend that's pretty well established now, which means you treat your documentation the same way a developer would treat HTML, JavaScript, C++ or C#, which means like versioning it basically. You're using a version control system to manage your code. Now, developer documentation is like a big trend. You're writing documentation for developers. So like usually an internal audience or a very specific technical audience. But anyway, that's how you would kind of follow that, and reading blogs of technical communicators, following like what sort of skills you might want to position yourself for jobs.
Yeah, that's great. If people have questions like what does those things mean, feel free to ask them now or ask them later. We'll have a pause in a few minutes. I do have some more questions though. I got the next one is kind of the exciting question, which is money. How much money might a technical writer, technical communicator expect to earn? I don't know, the first few years in the profession, later on.
Yeah. So it's one little provision is that, again, the industry is going to dictate a lot how much money you get paid. And I would say that has a bigger impact on your pay than your job title, because sometimes you'll have like technical writer, senior technical writer 2. In my experience, those don't mean a whole lot. Like that's a way for you to kind of progress in an organization. But broadly, I would say, so there is contract work, for termed positions, 6 to 12 months. And then there's, full-time salaried roles. I would say a pretty standard wage for a contractor might start around $25 an hour. For a salaried employee, again, the industry weighs very heavily there, but as an entry-level tech writer, I would ballpark your salary around $55,000 plus benefits. And a kind of really simple way to calculate benefits, like as your compensation package, is to add about 25%. So maybe closer to like 67, 68,000 if you're including like a retirement match, healthcare premiums, HSA, things like that. Yeah. But then median salaries, as you progress a little bit, a few years, get closer to probably, I think the median salary, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, is like 75,000. But then if you can get a certain kind of really technical skill set, it approaches 6 figures pretty quickly.
That's so interesting. I mean, I think if people don't mind me saying something awkward, I think it's one of the big difference, the later numbers you said show the difference between this field and working in academia, because you might say to yourself, well, the starting salary is kind of comparable to some of the teaching positions I've seen, but those increases will be unusual in academia. So yeah, that's great to hear. Okay, so you already mentioned this a bit before, but maybe you could talk about this in more detail. Maybe if people have questions, so this would be a good moment to jump in. But are there specific skills, qualifications, expertise, things that people could be trying to develop that you need, that a new grad, not an expert in the field, but a new grad might need or could develop?
Yes. So I'll reiterate that I think the most important skills you need as a technical communicator are the rhetorical skills, identifying audience and purpose, and then implementing the rhetorical devices. Logos, really, you're not making ethical or emotional appeals in documentation. But you do, to some, you need to know your audience, basically. Like if it's internal, there's, certain ways you're writing documentation that are a little different from just like a kind of general user profile for, a customer. Employers should recognize that communication skills are more important. But that said, a lot of recruiters and hiring managers will still, like in a job announcement, it might say they want X number of years experience with Adobe FrameMaker or, a certain static site generator or something to meet, or an even worse, like just an editor, like a tool. So that's a little arbitrary, but you do see that a lot, like especially from recruiters, because they don't know the company that well that they're hiring for. So like they just get like, some check boxes from a hiring manager. But so with that said, you do want to be fairly proficient in like certain standard tools. WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get. Editors like Microsoft Word, for sure. You want to know how to correctly create and use styles, section breaks, the table of contents. FrameMaker, you might want to become familiar with that, and how to edit PDFs in Acrobat. But other important skills to know, really, since most documentation is online now. I mean, there are definitely still roles where you'll be creating Word documents or Google Docs or other like static documents like that. But largely, I would say most doc will become HTML at some point. It'll be web-based, like something like Confluence maybe, or a static site generator called Jekyll, which is just a simple web page that doesn't have like JavaScript or like there's no user database on the back end. So you don't have to log in or anything. So HTML and CSS, you don't have to be like a front-end developer. You don't have to be able to create websites from scratch, but you do need to understand the syntax, like be able to read HTML and do some light editing. You probably won't have to ever create those documents from scratch, but you do need to know how to read them and kind of make some tweaks here and there. Another big one now, so I mentioned docs as code earlier. When I said a version control system, Git, G-I-T, is the big one. And that's like, if you're not familiar, that's like similar to what Dropbox and Drive do. It's going to back up your documents and you'll be able to see specific versions of those documents. But the big issue that Git solves is like having multiple people working on the same project or the same file, and it can kind of merge all those together and distribute that out so that like everyone has a copy of the same project on their local computers. And then there's like a remote repository, like GitHub, for example, is a remote repository. Git is really complicated, but the good news is there are some really good user tools, like UI tools, like Atlassian has one called Bitbucket, and then there's like GitHub, GitLab. It can be very simple, but it quickly becomes extremely complicated to use Git. There are like 6 basic commands that you need to know, and if nothing goes wrong, no problem. They're very easy to use. But that said, Git it's not a requirement, but for a lot of jobs, you're going to see Git or Mercurial is another one. You're going to see that in a lot of job postings. And if you can at least understand the commands, you can say as a tech writer, you're pretty good to go there. And then just some kind of document design skills would be really important. Like there's an author called Robin Williams, and she has a book called The Non-Designer's Design and Type Book. It's a really great resource. It breaks things down in a very it's a great piece of documentation. But that book goes over things like proximity, alignment, repetition, contrast, kind of basic document design principles that will really inform the way you structure your documentation.
This is fantastic. Thank you. So, and I just want to recap for everyone, you know, there's a range of skills that you've described here. You finished with design ideas, so laying out documents, but you also talked about a series of different kind of essentially versioning and sort of collaboration writing environments, like say GitHub. And then in the beginning, you talked about kind of web page design, HTML, which is supposed to be the content of the site, and then CSS, how it looks, to put it in very simple. Is that valid?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, HTML structures a web page. It should be semantic. That is, it doesn't necessarily, the tags mean like what they say. Like there's a nav tag, it should be navigation. That's what you should put in there. And then like, you know what, an unordered list should be a bulleted list of things. You know, you can, it'll let you get away with a lot, but it's supposed to be, you separate your semantics versus your presentation. And that's what CSS is.
Fantastic. Okay. What might be a good first job that a new grad, someone in this room, could aim for after they finish their degree?
So there is a lot of, this is a tough question to answer. There's a lot of contract work out there. So if you are comfortable with the ethics of temp labor, there are plenty of roles out there. So in that case, if you're taking one piece of advice I would give you, if you're looking at contract, I mean, it's a great way to get into the field, right? It'll give you a line on your resume. You'll learn some skills. That's great. The one piece of advice I would give you there is, though, keep your job search going. You know, if what you want is full-time work, and I think that's probably what most people are looking for, keep that job search going. And then I would say feel absolutely comfortable and ruthless about leaving your contract employer on the timeline that is best for you. So if you need to keep your contract job going until the day you start your full-time job, just do that. Like if they wanted a full-time, you know, if they expect that to some extent. So don't, you know, that's not going to come back and haunt you on your resume. Just don't let them contact them as references. Don't worry about that.
That makes sense. So there's lots of freelance work out there. It comes with all the drawbacks that freelance work has, but there's lots of projects out there just to get started on.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, this is the final question. So I put this in the chat, but if people have some questions ready, I've got one more question, and then maybe you guys, if you're in the room would like to ask some questions, you can turn on your microphone, you can post in the chat, I don't mind. And then we've got a workshop that Andrew's prepared for us, which I'm very grateful for. We're going to try it in a bit. So my final question is, and this was a question that the GSE suggested to me, which was, what could be something a student here at UT, someone watching this session right now, could try to do now during their studies to put them in a good position to look around for a job later? And the reason for asking that is, often when you're a student, you hear about all this stuff and you're like, oh yeah, I'm so busy, I'll look into that later. And then you're going to graduate in 2 months and you think, oh, what do I do now? What is something or some things that a person could do now so that sort of just get themselves in a good position?
So the first thing I'm going to say, you already know this, and I hope this is not frustrating. The first thing to do is network. You have to meet people. And I mentioned the Society for Technical Communication earlier. There's a chapter in Knoxville. So if you are there, I mean, even if you're not there, you can do this remotely, but join and be an active member. Participate in their, I think they do monthly events. Student memberships are pretty inexpensive, and you can even volunteer to be a student liaison, which I think is free or close to free, like maybe $25 or something like that. I was a student liaison when I started grad school, and that's how I met the woman who became my first colleague and mentor at Emerson. I think honestly, every job, certainly as a tech writer, every job I've gotten has been because I met a person who remembered me later and I was nice to them. There's also an online community called Write the Docs, WRITE, the Docs. They started as a Slack channel, but it became so popular that they do conferences all over the world now. The big ones are in Portland, Oregon. There's one in Prague, and there's one in Melbourne, I think. And they do other meetups, you know, on a local level. So Write the Docs, if you join that community on Slack, just kind of talk to people on there. There's so much good information, a lot of expertise just out there and available. You can also participate and volunteer at like scientific, medical, tech gatherings. If there are conferences or even just lectures around town or at the university, that's a good place to meet people and just kind of chat with people and see, you know, what kind of work they're doing, what kind of documentation needs that they have. Again, you just want people to remember you when they're hiring people. And then find a mentor. That's another good one. The English department has a mentor program for undergraduates, and it's like an alumni mentorship program. So there's the mentor program. If there are still technical communication classes, I know Dr. Hurst and there was another professor who retired. They both retired around the same time. So I don't know if that expertise is in the department, like I don't know who that is now. But you can take classes with those people and stay in contact. And then, yeah, just meet tech writers like around town, you know, go to the SDC events and just meet them and be memorable. So that was networking. There's other things. You can build your portfolio by contributing to doc projects. Google has a project called Season of Docs. And that is like, I think open source projects, or it's people looking for documentation, and they do pay. And there's sort of maybe a bid process or an application process for you as a writer to contribute to that. There's also GitHub. This would be free, but like GitHub, there's all kinds of open source projects that you know, people need documentation for. You won't get paid, but it is, you know, your name will be there as a contributor to the documentation. You can point to that on a resume. They will ask, when you're applying for jobs, almost certainly ask you for a portfolio or work samples, so you can point to that. A lot of applications will ask for your GitHub like username now. So I was just job hunting, and at least half, I would say, of the applications I filled out wanted my GitHub account name. What else? Reading blogs, just staying current, being aware of what's going on in TechCom. There's a really great blog called I'd Rather Be Writing, and that's by a tech writer named Tom Johnson. Another one called Every Page is Page One, or, well, that's a book, but you'll find the author Mark Baker. One thing I would say you can ignore are technical writing certificates. There are a lot out there. You can pay for them. I would say, in my opinion, first of all, no hiring manager has ever asked me about a certificate. There's really no standardizing body. The Society for Technical Communication is pretty big, and they offer them. But I would say that the curriculum, you know, that's just what, you know, that's one body's interpretation of what you need to know. There's nothing underwriting those certifications. If you're going to get one, don't pay for it. You know, that's fine. If someone's paying for it for you, or there's like a free one, that's great. You can put that on your resume, but I would say I wouldn't consider them that valuable.
That's great. I mean, I could see I see people in the room thinking like, well, you've mentioned so many things up there before, you know, Bitbucket and so on. But is your suggestion that like you might not even learn that stuff in the technical certificate? Like you might still not have the up-to-date tools. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I've never taken a certificate course for tech writing, but I think it's going to cover probably things like audience and purpose, maybe some document design. There'll probably be a lot of grammar, which maybe if you're taking tech editing or business writing, that's probably things that you're going over already as a student. And if as students in the humanities, you already know these things, and they're also, when you're writing documentation, there's sort of the more like lower order concerns, grammar and like copy editing. It's important, but it's also like the last thing you're going to do, like structuring a document well and making sure it's ready for like it's structured well in terms of like being able to reuse certain pieces of information, and writing for clarity. Those are more higher order concerns than like when I took tech editing, it was a lot of like grammar, voice, punctuation. You're not going to have to do like that kind of like test or anything like that. Like people are just going to assume that you know how to write.
Yeah. Okay, great. Andrew, we're gonna move on in a bit to the next part, but this is a great moment to ask questions because we're gonna do the workshop. Maria, we got a great question in the chat. Should I ask your question in the chat, or do you want to ask it? Okay, so question. I'm thinking about the scenario of working for an engineering company. How much engineering do you have to know to do the technical writing? Did I get the question? Is that a question right? How much engineering do you need to know to be a technical writer for an engineering company?
Great question. Yeah, because tech writers are going to work in potentially any industry. You don't need any engineering background. There are some jobs that will want you, maybe in like something like aerospace, they might want you to have an undergraduate degree in an adjacent field. But broadly speaking, technical writers don't need to be experts in the domain they're writing about. So I had no background in healthcare before I started at Cigna. I had no background in manufacturing or engineering before I worked at Emerson. The way you solve for that when you're writing is that you have subject matter experts, SMEs, and they are the ones who are kind of giving you, in some cases, draft material. They'll certainly be the ones who are reviewing any documentation that you create. And then kind of back and forth, depending on how like meetings are structured at that organization, you might meet with those subject matter experts or project managers like on a weekly or even daily basis. So you have opportunities to bounce ideas off of them and ask questions about the more technical aspects of your documentation. So yeah, you'll learn. I mean, one of the things I love about tech writing is that you're always in a position to learn new things. You're not going to become an expert, of course, in engineering by writing documentation, but you will learn some fun things. And yeah, the SMEs are the ones who are going to handle that sort of technical aspect, and you just have to learn how to present that information.
I see. Thanks.
Yeah.
Other questions? I was going to add something about the idea of being a freelancer, doing free work. And I think that, it can, while you're building up a portfolio, I'm not a professional technical writer, but I'm sort of thinking of some adjacent fields. While you're building up a portfolio, it can be really good to take on free work and freelance work, just so you've got things to show people. The issue is just like not keep doing that. Like if you want to be an event host, you could make one event that was totally free, just so you've done it and you can show someone, look, I put together this conference, it was free, these people showed up. But then, my experience is like, you don't want to then keep making it free. You probably want to start charging at some point, or expect to be paid. But I think sometimes people turn their nose up at some level of free work or freelance work, when it would be really valuable to just sort of figure out how things work.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, that's how I got into the field, volunteering with Society for Technical Communication as a student liaison. They had, their monthly meetings, and then at the time they were running an annual or biannual conference called Peacock, Practical Conference on Communication. I don't know if they're still doing that, but I just volunteered and helped speakers get set up and kind of just do some really logistical grunt work things. But that's how I met the woman who offered me a job later. She did a presentation on DITA, which is like an XML schema for documentation. And I asked her a question, and she just remembered, like, oh, Andrew, he's over there he's at STC and at UT. And then she emailed me. So yeah, just doing a little free work can pay off dividends in the long run.
Other questions? It's a great question, by the way, Maria. Thank you.
I have a question. I don't know if this is something you would necessarily know the answer to, but have you ever felt that there's sort of competition between people coming from an English major background, let's say, and people coming from like a communication major or a more technical major, where companies are still wanting to hire people who are along those lines versus seeing the broader spectrum of skills that English majors have? Is that a thing at all? What's your experience been like with that?
No, I haven't noticed that there is like a divide among the background of technical writers. So there are now, of course, like technical writing degrees. You can get a bachelor's and even master's and PhD in technical communication. But I think it's still the case that most tech writers are coming from English, communications, journalism, things like that. Yeah, I haven't noticed any sort of competition or like that employers favor one background or another. I wouldn't say that that's a truth, but I've never heard of that.
Okay, great, thanks.
We've got a great question in the chat. I'm going to read it out for people who are watching the replay. So the question is this, Andrew. I'm actually coming from another field, ESL teaching and college level teaching. I'm not a graduate student anymore, graduate in 2021, congratulations. I've always been interested in tech writing. I feel like every application for tech writing asks for 1 to 2 years experience. I know you mentioned a few things about freelance work, but my concern with that is it could be difficult to do freelance work if you already have a full-time job. Are there other ways to get into this field? Would applying as a junior tech writer be the right way to go?
Okay, yeah. So I think at the heart of that question, you're asking about like your experience level as it matches up with the job announcement. So what I would say about that is often the job announcement is for the like perfect candidate. So if you don't have certain qualifications like that they list, like certain skill sets, if you don't have like the right number of years experience, I would say just apply anyway. There's no downside to applying for a job that you feel you're not qualified for. They're not going to like call you up and be like, how dare you? And they're not going to pass that information on to anyone. If you feel like this is a job that you can do, apply for it. Because yeah, right. Like you can only take on so much work, right? So trying to freelance as a side gig just to get that experience, like your skills as a teacher, a lot of that is going to translate to technical writing. Like there's, in fact, instructional design is something that tech writers would often do, like maybe onboarding material or training material within an organization. that's a common thing that tech writers would do. So pretty, I think, a close relationship to teaching. So yeah, you don't have to look for just junior roles. I would say if you feel like what is listed in the job announcement is like matches up with your skill set, just go ahead and apply.
And this is a really obvious, addition, but I wonder if it's possible to, this is just so basic, but just for what it's worth, if people are watching the replay, is it possible to kind of conjure up on your resume a series of writing type things you've done for the last year or two, and so you have at least something on the resume that looks like a writing, even if it's not, there was never a point where your job was, writer. I feel like it's possible to construct things. And I also think that just to add to this thing about free projects, often those projects can be quite small. Like, I agree with you, like not trying to become a freelancer at the same time as you're doing, a full-time job, but it might be possible to find time to do some small things. And then you look like someone interested in the field. Is that a fair comment, Andrew? I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've sat in on interviews like with candidates who, like, frankly, didn't have any tech writing experience and really had no background in technical communication. And like looking at their resume, I'm like, well, it doesn't really look like they like have the experience for this, but they still got an interview, right? Like, I was at the company and they're like, well, we're gonna interview these candidates. I'm like, okay, I'll give you my feedback. But yeah, I would say, if you're listening to this or you're here on the call right now, you are in the process of getting a writing intensive degree. So you already have a lot of the skill set necessary for technical communication.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. Other questions before we move on? Well, I don't want us to run out of time. So, Andrew, we got an exercise, and please don't run away, everyone. This is I think something really unique about this session is we can actually try and do some tech writing tasks and try out, and so some of this might be, just so you understand what people are talking about, it might be that maybe you have a complete outrage. I can't believe any human could do this. And then maybe that's a sign that's maybe not the best field for you. Or you might love it and you might think this is so satisfying. And that's probably also kind of useful. Andrew, do you want to take it away? Tell us about this exercise we're going to do.
Sure. I guess I will share my screen and so I have some. Oh, okay, sure. Let's do that. Oh, sorry, I'm getting like a system message about recording. Sorry, let me take care of that real quick. Yep. Oh, sorry, it wants, Daniel, can you share your screen with the links I sent you? It wants me to restart Zoom for these permissions.
Yeah. I know that.
Sorry.
One of my favorite things.
And actually, you know what? I can actually put this in the chat if you want to anyone wants to open it. So here are first the.
Sorry, everyone. Sorry, I'm just trying to apologize.
Sorry, yeah, I should have.
This is
probably. So you
okay.
should. Hopefully you can open that link. I think we tested that before. So this is just sort of the context, and then we have another. I'm going to put another link in here with the sample text. So yeah, we talked about this. Technical writers simplify complexity, producing knowledge resources. Markdown. So this is the exercise we're going to do today. Markdown is a lightweight markup language. It's a human readable form of HTML, which just means it kind of gets all of the tags out of the way, so there's not so much like in your field of vision. It's just easier to read, and it structures websites. So again, I mentioned this a little earlier. That contrasts with CSS, cascading style sheets, which tells the browser what the page should look like, and then JavaScript, which has like interactive functions, like maybe sending forms and other things like that. Markdown always becomes HTML. That's its whole purpose. It's just easier to read, and it's quicker to write. So you can write HTML and Markdown side by side, with one small caveat. It's probably not important right now, but we can, if we need to get to it. If it comes up, we'll talk about it. So this exercise is kind of representative of what you would do day to day. These are just some outcomes. Hopefully you'll understand what tech writers do, what Markdown is, and know whether or not you want to be a tech writer. So we're going to go to the writing exercise. Is
this correct?
Yes, that is the text. That's right.
Okay,
yeah.
wonderful. Okay.
And then here's the sample text that Daniel is showing you right now.
Do you want to share that link for people so they can join in the chat?
Yep, that's the one I just sent.
Awesome. Thank you.
218. So I just created kind of like a fake data dump of information for a password manager called PW Manager. It's not real. I've given you an audience and a purpose. So you're going to take the text below sample text and rewrite it for that audience for that purpose. So just a couple notes that were on the other page. Remember, so authoring is just like writing. It's an iterative process. So anything you do in 30 minutes is not done. It's not ready to be published, not ready to be really shared. So don't worry about getting things perfect. Things like spelling and grammar are not important at this point. What you're doing right now is trying to structure the page with Markdown using like headers and lists, paragraphs, links, however you think, as you're reading this, what you think might make the document easier to read. So if you go back to that first page, we have a sample text editor that actually Daniel pointed me to, markdown to html.com. And we'll use that as our editor so that you can kind of see what happens when you type something and it'll change over there. Yeah. And that page has a cheat sheet, although there's another Markdown cheat sheet that I think is slightly easier to read. You use whichever one you want, but it'll tell you kind of how to write Markdown, basically. Does that seem clear enough? Like the directions for like cleaning up the text and making it, structuring it with Markdown. If you know HTML, you can write in HTML also. But Markdown is it's very popular. So figured we'd start there.
So just to like add to this, you could say to yourself, well, wait, why are we doing the Markdown stuff? Well, one of the explanations is if you were to just copy and paste this sample text all the way down and try to put it on a website, there would be no formatting. The sample text would just be would just look like basic writing. It wouldn't look like a header. And so either we can put in HTML, which is a bit clunky to type and a bit clunky to read, or we can have this more elegant Markdown, and then it will be converted by into HTML. And so you could format the header so that it's structured to be a header with Markdown. What else should people look for? Do they need to look for links, right? So we're taking these, probably going to take these and add them to turn them into links. Is that fair?
Yeah, so I would say there are definitely places to use the header markups, those hashtags, places to use the link markup, ordered lists and unordered lists, code blocks, or not code blocks, but like just a code, maybe code blocks, maybe a code, putting things in that code format. And then you might want to use bold or italic text to call out certain terms.
So I don't want to make this, I don't want to take away the drama from the exercise, but for instance, are you suggesting that this might be a good list? Or something like that, like this
I would say
moment?
yes. Those are instructions. So that's probably, you want to use an ordered list for that.
Okay, great. And so just to make sure everyone understands, you can write whatever you want here, and it will show up in the preview. And if you use the markdown language, script, can never know what to go with it. It will be formatted as HTML. Do you see over here? And what that's actually producing is something that's a bit hard to read, right? It's easy to sort of make mistakes when you're reading it, whereas this is a lot easier. Is that,
Yeah.
Harley, does that make sense? All right.
Yep. Rochelle had a question in chat.
Oh, great.
Case sensitive. No, it is not. Markdown is not case sensitive. That was the question.
All right. Should we take it away?
And I'll be here for questions if you want to type them into the chat or ask them out loud, but yeah, just again, don't be worried about what you're going to produce, because obviously it's just an exercise. We just want you to see, is this the kind of work that potentially you could be comfortable doing? Because it is something you would be doing a lot.
And so final thing is, Andrew, would you recommend people just pasting the whole text into the Markdown editor and kind of going from there, or?
Yeah, that's probably how I would start. Just paste it all in there and then just start changing it however you want. You could use your own text editor, like TextEdit or Notepad++ if you've got that, if you feel more comfortable doing that, because it'll be maybe a bigger screen. When we're done, I do have, how I would mark it up with Markdown. We can take a look at that and just kind of see what, if it makes sense to you, like what questions you have and kind of differences that the way you approached it.
So final thing I'll say, and then I'll let everyone work. You can see that I'm feel so powerful. I've already managed to get my header formatted to, at the very least, it looks like a header. And I put in my 2 hashes because I've got this, I read this here and I put in hash, and then I next the text. And if I was trying to do that in HTML, it would be a little bit trickier to type out and read. All right, I'm going to stop talking. Shall we just give this a try? All right, so ask questions live, and let's give this a Andrew, would you reshare all the links in the chat just for new people who are just arriving?
Yes, sure.
Can I ask you a question, Andrew, while we're working?
Yeah, let's go.
So, look, if you see the bit that I'm highlighting on my screen, you've got, these are like in-app instructions, right? This is file new. Is there any way that how would you approach that? That's not like a link, or you wouldn't put that as like a hyperlink, would you? Or how would you format that?
Yeah, so using just Markdown, I would want to call that out as like a user interface element, depending on what system you're using. Like if they're like DITA, if you had like there would be an XML tag specifically for a thing that a user, does. But in Markdown, I would just call that out with bold text. That's my standard practice, would be just make a thing that a user is going to do is bold. And then I would do like window titles or dialogue titles in italics. Or, if I were writing the style sheet for DITA, if it was going to take that XML and then transform it into a web page, I would probably just write in the CSS, dot UI control or UI control text weight bold, So that's all. It's just going to do it on the back end and separate or semantics and presentation.
Got it. I've tried to implement a little of what you're describing.
Oh, this is a good question. Rochelle says, I just want to make sure I understand. Are we married to the text here, or should we edit the text as well? Yes, definitely edit the text. This is really badly written. And often that's what you'll get. Like if you're working with like an engineer or a developer, they're just going to send you all their notes and it's going to be a mess. And, they're not writers by profession. So it's your job to make it, like nice, crisp text that someone can read through and not get a headache reading. So yeah, you could, often that means cutting out a lot.
Are you a inline link person or a reference link person?
Wait, what is it saying about reference links?
Like, do you like to, like, I write in Markdown, I'm always inline, square bracket, round brackets. But some people have this thing with the link at the bottom. It's like a sort of footnote.
Right.
that's not how my brain works, but some people like it.
So I think if it depends on the use case for me, I use Markdown for like blogs or README files. So you don't necessarily need to separate the links from like out of their inline context. But if I were using Markdown in like, let's say Jekyll, which is a static site generator, I would want maybe to have one place where that link lives so that I'm not rewriting the link every time and introducing the potential for a typo or something, or, you know, the link could change, right? So in that case, I would want to have the link, it's called a key value pair. And so I would have a reference to that link somewhere so that if I had to ever edit it, I only have to edit it once. So in a larger documentation system, I would, want referential links as opposed to inline.
Because if it's inline, you're going to have to go back through, you know, if they change this page, you're going to have to go back through every single time you wrote that out and edit it.
And yeah, for Markdown, they're handling that one way. But if you're in a larger, like a documentation system like DITA, they're going to have their own way to handle links that is like, it's called single sourcing, as in there is a single source of that information.
That's great. Thank you. How are people doing? Do you feel like ready to share? Do you want more time? Do you want to put, do you want to share your, you can always, I mean, you can always share your Markdown into the chat. We could paste it in, or I don't know what the best option would be. I can let someone share their screen if they would like. Oh, it's great, Harley. I'm so happy to hear that.
I would say a lot of tech writing, by the way, is troubleshooting. There's a ton of trial and error. So like you're always going to be making mistakes as you're authoring, even if you really know your system very well and you know the markup very well, you're going to make mistakes. So don't feel nervous about sharing your markup here so we can talk about it. We'll look at mine later, and I can tell you it's not perfect. You know, there are definitely ways it could become better. But the conversation will be good. Let's see. So if links are, if you're having trouble with the links, yeah, I always forget, or I used to always forget, like if you needed which order the square brackets and which order the parentheses came in, and I would get it backwards all the time. So the square brackets are what you want people to see, and then the parentheses are where the link is going, the URL. Yeah. Daniel's got it in the chat.
After some errors, I should say that I did not share with you all. I got my brackets completely messed up.
It's a lot of errors. I'm telling you, I mean, you'd be surprised if you ever take a tech writing job, you'll be surprised that it's not as much writing as you would think. It's a ton of troubleshooting. It's like 50% troubleshooting, and it's like, I don't know, maybe 25% authoring, and then like sort of other concerns.
Something that I find tricky with Markdown, that might not be what's happening, Sally, but spacing is really important. So like some of these things only like pop up as the correct HTML when the space, you know, like, so there's a heading, there's a space in between the hash and then the text for heading, but there's no spaces in between these. There's no spaces in between the bracketed parts for the link.
Yeah, that's true of the headers too. If you use the hashtags and then you don't leave a space before the header, it's just gonna come out hashtag header.
The famous Apple observer and writer John Siracusa calls these errors markdowners. Where you've got a, he'll say you've got a markdowner over there.
I love puns. I think they're an elevated form of humor.
And I think you were going to mention this earlier. Something I think is to be aware of is that there's some functionality in Markdown to let you show code on the page, because otherwise the same converter that tries to convert the Markdown into HTML will just try and convert your code into HTML, into formatted text, and something will probably go wrong. And so there's a particular use of backticks to say, like, this area is, just show this as it is, don't convert this bit into something else.
Yeah, exactly. And that's for like a multiple lines of code. If you use 3 ticks on either side. You can also, if you just want to say, like, here's this HTML element, here's the B, or in Markdown, like asterisk text asterisk. If you want to show that, with the asterisks, you would put a backtick on either side.
It works. Or maybe it doesn't. My backtick's wrong. Okay, now I got it right. Okay, so this is the example, so that now it shows the hashes that I actually wrote, because I had these backticks. All right, everybody. We're coming to the end of the session. Do you want to show us a lot? Share a sentence even? You don't need to do share the whole thing. How did you handle the paragraph about the different operating systems?
Are you asking me or the audience?
I was going to ask the audience first, but Andrew, you go for it. What would you do?
Let's see. Yeah, okay, we can start with me. So I will actually, here's a link to the full text that my markup is here. And I'll copy that, with the operating system. So here's how I did it. And I know right now it's not gonna like the spacing between the unordered list and the ordered list, the hyphens and the numerals. But if you add one more line break there, it will look correct.
Wow, yours is so readable. Oh my God, I feel embarrassed what I did. Wow.
So you're probably noticing it. There's a lot less text. You know, there's a lot of markup, but there's fewer words because a lot of it was just not. It was a lot of sort of fluff and kind of repeating itself, and kind of the tone wasn't quite right. That's just that's a stylistic thing. But yeah, there was a lot to get rid of anyway.
Andrew, I'm going to Rochelle shared some of hers in the chat. I'm going to post that into the converter if that's okay.
Yeah.
I like it. Did that come across, Rochelle? Maybe that was. Wow. And so just to clarify, anyone is like, wait, I still don't get it. Once you get to like a full document with HTML, it just becomes hard to, read through this, edit it, edit for sense. Whereas this text, okay, it's not plain, it's not a 5-paragraph essay style English, but it is readable in a way that this is a lot harder to process. Okay. Oh, Holly. Okay, I'm gonna erase Rochelle's artwork. Okay, this is Holly. Is this copied across okay?
Yeah.
And these are both good examples. Like you've done a good job of marking up both Rochelle and Harley. Yeah, these are really good, like first drafts of everything. Good use of headers and like breaking things down. Bulleted lists and ordered lists are just easier to digest for people, kind of separating paragraphs just look intimidating. I don't know, like a big chunk of text is just like, I don't want to read all of that. So yeah, the more that you can cut out, the more concise you can be. That's one way to simplify complexity.
Can you show us what your one looks like?
Me?
Yeah, Andrew.
Yeah, sure. Do you want to paste that into the... And then after that, just add one space after Mac OS, add one more line break, because for some reason this parser doesn't like that there's a bulleted and a numbered list right next to each other. Or sorry, one more line break, not a space. Yeah.
Is this intentional?
Yeah, the strike through. So that was just, I just wanted to, I guess, see how people would handle it. So the specific audience I called out, you probably wouldn't expect them to be working on the command line.
That's true, you wouldn't.
But I mean, if you were gonna write it, you would this might be how I would do it, because if someone knows how to use Homebrew, they don't need a set of instructions on how to get to the terminal and like change directories to the right place. They just need the command they need to download that that package. So it would just look like that. Maybe I would put that in a table, like an inverted table, but your audience of like your parents probably is not using the command line.
Yeah, I was not sure how to put this in my text, so I just cut it out. But yeah, this is good.
That's a good way. Yeah, you probably wouldn't, for this documentation, you probably would not have the command line instructions in this documentation. So that is a good approach.
Oh, I like that, Harley. Like, what even computer do you have? Are you looking at your phone? Here's how to find out. Can you turn it around in your hand and look at the back? Then it's probably a phone.
Yeah, and I like the way you called that out. Like, it's separated from the rest of the text. It is I think you've got it in bold and italic, but it's very, it grabs the user's attention, and it's separated. It's clearly not an instruction, and it's not a header. Yeah, that's a good call out.
Yeah, when I saw that the audience specification, I immediately went back to all my many experiences doing tech support for older family members. So
yeah.
wanted to throw some of that in.
Yeah, the old one of like, it's not letting me log in. I've tried my email 1,000 times. What's wrong? And then you look at it, they use a totally different email to create their account. Andrew, we're coming to the end. This has been wonderful. Can we all get a thank you to Andrew for doing this? I really appreciate it. I feel like we've learned a lot. Hi, Sally. How can people learn more about you, become super fans? Is there a link to your poetry collection yet?
Yeah. So I'm going to release the book in 2 weeks from today, on the 21st, September 21st. My author's website is andrewdillonpoetry.com. And yeah, just that has links to my published poems that are available. I'm on LinkedIn. Let's see, what's my shortened URL there?
So a question about UT offer. So UT does offer technical writing. If it teaches exactly what we've just studied with Markdown, that is going to depend on the class. But we, Sally might be a better explainer of this than I am, but we have an introductory 300 level class, Introduction to Technical Writing. And then there are more advanced classes in the tech concentration.
I think so. To get into the more like technical side of tech writing, like learning markup languages and maybe some scripting and things like that, that would probably depend on you a little bit more to like identify a project where you would need those skills and to start kind of playing around and trial and error to use them. I don't know the extent of the catalog in tech writing, but my experience and like people I talk to, it's going to be a lot more focused on like theory and like a lot of like grammar applications and things, like really firming up those things like voice and copy editing and things like that. But I don't know. I mean, maybe those have developed more since I've left.
I'll jump in and say that, yeah, Andrew and Daniel, I think that's a pretty good assessment of the offerings here. It really is focusing more on the writing for your audience. Now, we do have there might be some cases where you do learn some Adobe products, working with Adobe, or learning a markup language or some other language, but often those are so specific to the jobs, that, you know, what you learn in a class here might not be what you end up doing on your job. So you might learn something here, but that will give you the skills to learn whatever you need for your job to know where to go. So I know a lot of students in the past have used LinkedIn Learning, lynda.com, whatever, LinkedIn Learning, to help them learn some of those, XML languages or HTML or some of the other markup languages, just to help them figure out what they might need to be able to put, hey, I'm taking classes on this, or I'm learning this language, so they can put it on their CVs.
Everybody, this has been wonderful. Thank you, Sally. If you send me questions, if you've got more questions, we're going to end here at time. Thank you so much, Andrew. This has been really helpful. And thank you to everyone for coming, for trying this out. And then our next speaker in October is going to talk about content strategy and content strategy roles. It's going to be a great conversation. Andrew, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I had a great time talking to you and meeting everyone else, and just really diving into the details here.
Thank you, everybody. Okay, see you for the next one.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.